Yeah, well, I may not know my flowers, but I know Dr. Umar Johnson is blind and that he's wrong. And he doesn't know God. So he's telling people words, fancy words, in order to deceive them. Well, in reality, there is no such thing as sellout. Our battle is a spiritual battle. It's a warfare between good and evil. And within the black people, most black people today are in a fallen state. They don't know God. They don't have love. They come from screwed up families, so they're very angry. And in their state of anger, they're very judgmental because they have a big pride about them, which is the nature of Satan. And so when other blacks overcome that fallen state and return to what is right and love what is right and love God with all their heart, soul, and might, and their neighbor as themselves, the blacks who are in a fallen state cannot handle that because they're very judgmental. And what they try to do in their state of evil, they try to keep other black men and women down because they hate good. And if you notice, Tammy, most black people today don't believe in God. Most of them are evil and they hate good. And that's what the primary state is. So they'll blame somebody else for their problems rather than facing them themselves. And you can always tell a man or a woman who is in a fallen state, they blame everybody else for their failures. And most black people are doing that today.
When you deal with the concept of the sellout, you have to deal with it within the context of post-traumatic slavery disease. I always say that the Negro is one of the greatest creations of the modern era because the Negro is the only organism that will work against its own best interests without being paid to do so. And when we deal with the politics of selling out, we have to recognize that selling out is extremely accepted in the black community because the black community has never created a code of conduct for its members. Every other culture, although they are not monolithic, they do not live in a utopia, but they do have a code of conduct. We have never created such a code in the modern era. And because we haven't created a code, a lot of people can ignore the accusation that they have sold out because every person has their own definition, which is based on their own personal commitment to the black community. So for example, to Dr. Umar Johnson, if you date outside of your race, you're a sellout because protecting and maintaining the traditional black family, in my opinion, is something that all of us should be in the business of doing. But for the next person, dating outside of your race may be accepted. Some people would see a black person worshiping an image of Jesus as a white man as clearly being indicative of selling out. But someone else would say there's nothing wrong with worshiping Jesus in the image of your oppressor. And so we have different levels of commitment to the black community. And those different levels of commitment, Tammy, dictate how high of a bar we set for one another.
It is used just like the word racism. We all know that there's no such thing as racism. It's a word that made up to deceive the blind. And so when they use the word sellout, it's meant to divide and conquer. But if you're not in a fallen state, meaning that Satan is not your daddy, you can see the game that's being played. Like Dr. Umar just said, he just spoke as a blind man. He has no idea what he's talking about because there's no such thing as slavery syndrome or whatever he said. Our battle is a spiritual battle. It's either right or wrong, good or evil. And in the good old days when boys were boys and men were men, men knew that and they led their wives and children in the right way to go. And they did have a conduct of morality. They treated everyone they would like in the way that they would like to be treated, never mind the color. They taught their children how to work and be responsible and not blame and whine. And they didn't put it out there as though they couldn't make it. Yeah, well, I may not know my flowers, but I know Dr. Umar Johnson is blind and that he's wrong. and he doesn't know God. So he's telling people words, fancy words, in order to deceive them. If you knew that our battle is a battle between good and evil, then you wouldn't make up words in order to deceive. You would tell the truth and hope that those who are blind may wake up and see the right way to go. I grew up on a plantation down in Alabama under the Jim Crow law, and back then, black people...
There were no slaves on that plantation?
Well, yeah, they had, as a matter of fact, my grandparents' parents ran the plantation, but they weren't slaves when I was growing up. And the point is, black people had a sense of morality then, and they loved what was right. They worked hard. They loved their country. They didn't blame because the men were leading the way.
I believe that Jesse Lee Peterson knows better. In fact, he would be a textbook definition of a sellout, because he is the type of black man who will bend over backwards to absolve the American white power structure of any responsibility for what happens to black people. And like many sellouts, they always ignore or they try to retreat away from acknowledging the role that systemic racism plays in the life of black people. Racism is not only about the individual mistreatment of black people, it is about the systemic mistreatment of black people. See, racism is a system that all white people participate in to disadvantage all members of another group. So you don't opt in, you don't opt out. And members of the target group don't opt in or opt out. But what they can do, as Jesse Lee Peterson has so effectively done in his career, is they can identify with the power structure. They can identify with white racism, and they can carve out a niche for themselves by defending the racism that is attacking black people, as opposed to defending black people against that racism. A black man in America who does not stand up for his people and in turn aligns himself with the structure that is eating away at the opportunities of black people can go very far in this country. Senator Tim Scott is an example. Jesse Lee Peterson is an example. And we will continue to create these types of personalities, Sister Tammy, if we don't come up with a code and if the black community doesn't start holding its members accountable for dysfunctional behavior.
At one time, there were slaves in America. That is not happening today, and it wasn't happening when I was growing up in Alabama. This idea that slavery is the cause of the lack of morality for black people is insane. It's just another sign of an illogical mindset. And when I was growing up, black people at that time were known to be men and women of character. Today, black people, not all, but most, are known to be men and women who lack character. The world knows that black people are suffering not because of this phony idea of racism, slavery, systemic racism, and all that crap. They know that black people are immoral, that they come from failing parents, and that they hate everybody, and they have no love.